Stakeholder.
In gambling, an independent party with whom each of those who make a wager deposits the money or counters wager.
A person with an interest or concern in something, especially a business.
In emergency management, any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival and recovery of a given community. You.
Welcome to Stakeholder Prepping.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you are the stakeholder in your own survival. We are your hosts. My name is Chris.
And I'm AC. And today, we're going to go into a little bit of a deeper dive into one of our previous episodes. Remembering that each step of preparing is kind of this building blocky thing, right? We're building on what we learned last week and the week before and the week before. So today, we're going to take a deeper dive into the risk matrix. We're going to expand on that early episode because we keep coming back to it. So I think it's important to sort of revisit that and do a little deeper dive.
Yeah, and I think you're at 100% on target, AC. We're actually going to be digging into some of the more mechanical or intrinsic pieces, whatever you want to call it, of what makes a good risk matrix and how you can really use it to keep you and your family safe. We're also going to be taking a look at how you can really build your own kind of prepper cheat sheet for what to do in almost any type of situation, because you can develop your risk matrix into a decision tree.
Right. So like for this episode, my risk matrix says there is a high likelihood that I will make a bad joke with a moderate impact to your amusement.
Pretty sure you already hit that one, but yeah,
we'll go with it. Wait. Okay. Why did the risk matrix break up with the probability assessment?
Oh, God.
Because it felt the relationship was too high impact with a low likelihood of ever going anywhere.
You know, I'll take it. I'm going to give you credit on that one. That was
matrix joke.
That was clever.
Okay. So this one's going to be interesting. And I can see a lot of what ifs and thought experiments and kind of that thing, right? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, a lot of this is going to be, we're going to take a look at kind of a standardized risk matrix, and then we're going to look at some of the rabbit holes you can go down, which is hundreds, if not thousands. Sure. We're going to take a look at second and third order effects, those secondary and tertiary things that happen after the onset of any emergency or disaster, and really kind of how you can integrate and fine tune your plan to fit your risk matrix and vice versa, so that you have, like I said, a cheat sheet. You can build a book that says, all right, page 1, power outage, skip to page 15 for XYZ, skip to page 17 for YZX. Mm-hmm. So really you can kind of build your own safety manual and instruction manual on how to deal with just about anything.
I like it.
And there are hundreds of rabbit holes that you can kind of chase down doing this, because like you said, a lot of it is thought experiment, etc. But let's kind of start with a recap, AC. So in your language, what is your definition of a risk matrix?
Sure. And so like every great podcaster, I think there's a time when you just start reading off the Wikipedia page. But, but so this is it. And I'll reference Wikipedia a bit, but then I will expand upon that. But, risk is the lack of certainty about the outcome of making a particular choice. So statistically, the level of downside risk can be calculated as the product of the probability that harm occurs, like an accident happens. And then that's multiplied by the severity of that harm, like the average amount of harm, or more conservatively, the maximum credible amount of harm. And I think this is really important that talking about the credible amount of harm, because you could say, well, I have a probability, there's some probability of me getting a car accident today, so I'm not going to get in my car because I could die. So we don't want to do that. We want to talk about kind of what's the credible amount of harm and how do we mitigate that. So it's rather than saying I'm just gonna roll myself in bubble wrap, it's like, no, I'll put my seatbelt on. And that's kind of the mitigation that I want here. So in practice, the risk matrix is kind of a useful approach where either the probability or the harm severity can't really be estimated with accuracy and precision. So although standard risk matrices, matrices, although the standard risk matrices exist in certain context, like, DoD stuff, or, I talked about the GAR model a little bit in our previous example, things like that. But you can kind of tailor it to yourself. So, is something catastrophic where, like, you're definitely going to die? Or is it critical where you've got sort of, accident level injury, or things marginal, minor injury, things like that? So the likelihood of harm occurring might be categorized as certain or likely or possible or unlikely or maybe even rare. However, it must be considered that very low likelihood may not be very reliable, right? So here's what I'm saying is, like, my personal risk matrix is a tool that I use to identify, assess, and prioritize potential risks in my personal life. So it's basically a visual representation that categorizes risks based on two factors. One, likelihood. So how likely is this thing to occur? Is it rare? Is it unlikely, possible, likely, and very likely? And then impact. So if the risk occurs, what would be the magnitude and consequences of that? Is it insignificant, or does it go all the way up to catastrophic? So it's basically this intersection between probability and severity. And then by plotting risks, like visually on a grid with these two axes,
I gotta think here.
axes.
Axes.
So you plot it on a grid with these two axes, then you can quickly see which risks are both highly likely and have a high potential impact. So that allows you to focus your efforts on mitigating or avoiding those things. So in simpler terms, a personal risk matrix helps you figure out what bad things could happen to you, how likely are they to happen to you, how bad would they be if they did happen to you, and which risks should you worry about the most. It's just kind of a way of bringing structure and clarity to thinking about potential dangers and then making informed decisions about how to manage them in your personal life. And I can tell you, like, when I was a kid, we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but based on the information I was receiving from the G.I. Joe cartoon, I would have thought that, like, the Bermuda Triangle or piranhas were just going to be, like, way more in my risk matrix as an adult.
Yeah. And you talked about your personal risk matrix. I mean, is getting killed by a cow on your risk matrix?
It's not, but it could happen.
Because the likelihood is always near zero, but it's never actually zero.
It's never actually zero. The law of averages says anything will happen that can. So yeah, everything should be on the risk matrix. It's just, how likely is that thing really to occur, and how much do you worry about it, and how much are you going to try to mitigate it, right? So yeah, it's we talked about this where, yeah, if you think about, it's not just everything could possibly happen to me. It's being able to kind of lay that out and say, well, I live in an area where forest fires are maybe likely, so I'm gonna mitigate that. Maybe it's just I'm gonna cut the shrubs around my house, or maybe it's I'm gonna go buy an old fire engine. But if I live somewhere in the desert where there's no vegetation and a very low likelihood of a forest fire breaking out because there's no forest, then buying that old fire engine is just kind of silly. Although it'd be really cool, like Mad Maxy, but not really useful in the terms of a risk matrix.
Yeah, and really for this episode, we're going to focus on kind of a 9-cell risk matrix. So if you're listening at home and thinking about this, think about a tic-tac-toe board, right?
Okay.
And So going down the side, you've got your rows labeled as unlikely, possible, and likely. So top is unlikely, middle is possible, and then the bottom is a likely event. And then going along your columns, you've got low impact, medium impact, high impact. So you've got 9 squares. And that low impact, unlikely event, that's just going to be a naturally low priority for you. That's going to be lightning struck the neighbor's house. It's not really affecting me. It kind of sucks that I have to smell their burning grass for a while, but okay, not a big deal. Low priority. Then you get into the medium impact, unlikely. Now it's something you potentially have to monitor. This is your water being shut off because of uh, excess flooding or a cyber attack or something along those lines. And then you have a high impact, unlikely event. That's a moderate risk, actually. That's going to be that F5 tornado starting up in a clear blue sky. It's very unlikely, but it would make a huge impact, and that's a moderate risk. When you go down into the possible category, you're low. That's still a monitorable event. When it gets into medium impact, now we're talking about a moderate risk. And this is something we have to consider if we're going to survive it. When you get into your high impact possible events, those are going to be kind of your higher priority, your number 1, number 2 type priorities if something happens. And then if you're in that likely category, even the low impact is a moderate risk. Medium impact becomes a high priority, and high impact and a likely event, that's a critical risk. That's walking into the welding shop with magnifying glasses on your eyes and saying, "Hey guys, I brought lunch without any protection. You're gonna go blind." Does that kind of make sense as far as risk versus likelihood?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that is going to be easier to visualize when you can actually look at it. So we'll put this kind of stuff on our blog with links so people can see what we're talking about. And I do want to, I think I do want to make, an observation here that I don't want people to think that we just like risk matrix out our entire life. That's not what it is. It's really about thinking about these large scale things that could happen to you. It's the zombie attack. It's the civil unrest. It's the Taylor Swift flash mob. It's these really important things that could happen, and you want to know how to mitigate these or have a lower likelihood of them actually impacting you. So think about the natural disasters. I think is the big one for me. It's really like I think about that a lot. Is the things that are a bit outside of my control. Those are the things that make the risk matrix for me, because the weather events, they could just happen and you need to have a plan to deal with those. And certain weather events are less likely for me, and certain weather events are like really likely for me.
And that's a really good point to bring up, is your matrix is going to be different than mine. Your risk level and your risk tolerance is going to be different than mine. But
100%.
preppers, for some reason, we always gravitate towards the big one, the Teotihuacan SHTF without rule
Always.
of law. Like, I think it's because it is so big and so abstract and so far out of our control that we assume that it's all going to happen at one time. And it generally doesn't. It's
Right.
generally using building blocks, second and third order effects to make things progressively worse and worse and worse. And there are stopping points in there that we just ignore because we're not prepared for the smaller things that lead to Thunderdome.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's where a big part of it comes from, is we always plan for, well, if I'm out of power for 6 months, I've still got food stores. Great. What do you do when you get a flat tire and it's snowing?
Right. Yeah, I was going to go to the flat tire. You're right. That flat tire is one of those things that could really, really mess up your day and have, it could have those second order and third order effects because, now you're late to work because you had a flat tire. And then if you didn't have the means to change the flat tire, well, now you're paying for the tow truck bill, and all those things can spiral out of control. And yeah, they're not as fun and not as sexy as Thunderdome, but honestly, they're more likely to happen.
I mean, I think just about anyone looks good running around in a tire rubber tread loincloth, but maybe that's just me. That's
100%.
Thunderdome to me.
100%. And there's just something about, like, the Master Blaster backpack thing walking around I just think that'd be cool. You're the tall friend, so I'm getting on your back. Finish him.
That was perfect. So let's talk about some of the second and third order effects. And
Okay.
some people thinking about this from a different light or a different perspective, this is also what's commonly known as the butterfly effect. Right?
Okay.
Butterfly flaps its wings in Taipei. In New York City, you get rain instead of sunshine. That's what chaos theory that Dr. Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park was talking about when he was trying to drip the water on Laura Dern's hand.
Yep.
That's what he's talking about, is second and third order effects. And we can narrow it down to pretty basic definitions. So second order effects or secondary effects are indirect consequences that result from the primary event. You get a flat tire, you are now late to work. That second order effect is you are late to work. Third order effects are the consequences of those consequences. Because you were late to work, you missed your presentation. We go to a fourth level. Because you missed your presentation, you got fired. We go to a fifth level. Now you don't have power because you don't have a job because you got a flat tire. It gets progressively worse, and it gets exponentially worse. The more you let it go on without mitigation, the harder it is to dig yourself out of that hole. So understanding what can, and like you said, this is Murphy's Law coming into effect, what will happen, that's a critical piece of understanding what you can do to actually effectively prepare and not just be a loot drop. And
yeah,
let's say that your primary risk is a hurricane, right?
mm-hmm.
So your first order effects, the hurricane hits, you have power outages and flooding. Pretty common, I would say. I mean, I deal with Florida property all the time. Flooding is a big issue. Power outages are a big issue during a hurricane. We've seen it time and time and time again. The second order effects is because of those power outages and because the trucks can't get in, now you have food supply chain disruption and fuel shortages. And then because of that, now people are going hungry. People can't get to places they want to go. Now you have civil unrest and potentially long-term economic strain or drain. That's from a hurricane. And those are pretty drastic second and third order. But you can extrapolate that out to, if your third order effect is unrest, what is that fourth order effect? Total collapse?
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's going to be cannibalism, maybe. I don't know if we're going there yet, but yeah, hungry people do crazy things. So you're right, being prepared for those second order and third order effects, and then being able to control those, because failing to plan is planning to fail.
Yeah, and failing to plan for those cascading effects, it can leave a massive gap in your own preparedness plan. I almost guarantee you, to anyone out there who wants to do it and knows how to do it, because the math is above me on this one, but I almost guarantee if you could build an algorithm to determine the second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way on down the line order effects of a single event, whether it's not putting your seatbelt on or running a red light, if you could calculate that out, 10 orders of effect, one, you would have a Nobel Prize, and two, the government would pay you whatever you want in however many biscuits and bullets you want for that algorithm. Because risk management is such a critical piece of emergency preparedness. If you know how to code and you can figure out that math, the sky is not your limit anymore. You can go wherever you want.
I hope AI isn't listening to this, because it's got to be something that's doable.
Recording in progress.
Right.
So we've kind of got our definition of our risk matrix.
Okay.
And we've got our second or third order effects. Let's just call them secondaries from now on, because everybody knows what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got our risk matrix. We've got our secondaries. How do we link those together? right? And I'm going to go step by step with how I learned how to do it. It may be different for you, but it's definitely worth a shot.
And this is like from emergency manager school, right? This is real curriculum. This is the way they teach you how to do things.
Yes, this is all coming from my experience getting my emergency management and disaster preparedness degree. Yes.
Cool. Okay.
So some of this is from textbooks, some of this is from research, and some of this is from experience. So bear with me. I'm going to try to make as much sense as I can, but we'll try to keep this fun as well.
Okay.
Step 1, list your primary threats. Use your local hazard data, historical events, expert opinions. List your top threats: wildfire, cyber attack, pandemic, flood, tornado, hurricane, earthquake, the neighbor's kid leaving the dog off the leash to come and attack you because you don't have the right kind of biscuits. Whatever your local threat is, list that. And then you're going to do some brainstorming. So if that event happens, for each threat on your list, you're going to list the immediate or primary effects. Dog got out, I got bit. Ask what happens because of that. And that is your second order effect. That is your secondary level, right? So what happened because of that? And you can have multiple secondaries. This is a key piece, is you can have multiple secondaries. I got bit, I had to go buy a new pair of pants, or I got bit, I got an infection, and now I have to deal with that. If it's the new pair of pants, it kind of ends at that, unless you really extrapolate into, I'm down the $50, I can't afford my daughter's birthday present, now she's going to be mad at me and she's going to grow up, and it's really, really, really easy to spiral on these.
Sure. This is the choose your own adventure, or like the reverse basketball bracket thing, right? Like we could go anywhere from it.
It is. You're building a tree, and you're building a decision tree based on what happens. And this is kind of the fatalist funnel, or that doom spiral that a lot of people feel like, well, if I do this, it doesn't matter, so the world is going to end anyways. We're not trying to do that, but it's really easy to get into that mentality. But really what you're doing is creating your threat. What happens if that threat happens? And then to get to that third order, what happens when that second effect happens, right? So dog got out, I got bit. There's my effect. I got a bacterial infection. That's my second order. I'm going to lose the leg. That's my third order. And kind of go from there. And so each event, each effect or order can have multiple branching options. And it's not really limited unless it's completely unrelated. I got bit by the dog, so the neighbor bought a shark. That doesn't really sync up. There's causation and correlation, and we want to keep everything in a single tree linked back to that one event.
Yeah, you do. And I think that something that people like you said, they go down the rabbit hole when the things on this decision tree, if you will, they need to be weighted. Like you need to think about, okay, what my secondary effect, but you need to have more weight on the more likely things there are to happen. And I think that's the rabbit hole a lot of people go down. They say, well, if the election goes this way, the secondary effect is total chaos in World War III, where that's probably not the most likely secondary effect, but that's what people gravitate to. So having these secondary and tertiary effects weighted, I think, is really important to say what are the most likely things that are going to come out of this, and then the tertiary effects of that, what are the most likely things, because people want to gravitate towards anything that kind of leads you to stabbing a zombie in the eye, I think, is where people want to go.
Yeah, because everybody's seen The Walking Dead and it's sexy.
And it's cool, but but in this apocalyptic scenario you've created, you're more likely to die of dysentery, so have some contingency medical antibiotics on hand.
I couldn't have said that better myself. And you're absolutely right. It does need to be weighted. So you can build these mind maps or flow charts or if then scenarios for your second and third order effects, your secondaries. But then you have to rate the likelihood and impact. You have to create kind of a mini matrix for each layer. So you can create kind of these nested matrices, or you can expand your impact scores. So the original hurricane, high likelihood, high impact. Second order, the fuel shortage, moderate likelihood, medium impact. And then that third order effect, the civil unrest, let's call that low likelihood, but it would be very high impact. So you can chain everything on a piece of paper or visually, however you want to code it. You can chain that full path from the incident all the way to the fallout.
And so you said nested matrices? Is that what that is?
Nested matrices.
I hadn't heard that. It's like a little Russian mushka nesting doll.
Yes.
There is another risk in here.
And that's a good way to look at it. Each nesting doll is its own likelihood and impact matrix.
Okay. Interesting. Now you've got me. You had me at Russian nesting dolls.
I knew there was something about you. But what you can do once you kind of build this out and build out your likelihood tree, it's going to be very heavily weighted in certain areas and not in others.
Sure.
And if you do this right and really think about it, you can prioritize your resources accordingly. You can have complete preparedness strategies, not just for that primary event, but to the ripple effects or the butterfly effect, secondary, third order. For example, if a hurricane is likely to cause a fuel shortage, you can stockpile or plan fuel alternatives in advance, and you're cutting off that civil unrest before it gets there.
Yeah, you're literally not participating in the second order effect, so that third order effect just can never happen to you.
Bingo.
Yep.
Right? And something that you can do with your family, this is a really, really, really good creative exercise for kids because you can basically take a night, sit down around a table with a pen and a paper and just talk about it and just write it out. And if you really want to get into it, you can create scenario cards and basically give your kids a D&D campaign, a one-shot, roll for did you get shot in the face? Okay, well, I guess your game is over, so why don't you go over there and watch Bluey? The rest of us are going to figure this out.
You can tell we don't have children where we're like, let's play a dice game where your kids could get shot in the face.
Yeah, we don't have kids, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm no longer going to be allowed to watch nieces and nephews.
But yeah, you can really get interesting with this and create different scenarios, create add-ons, and what happens next. And it almost becomes a board game or a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that you're playing, but you're able to extract the information from that and find out what would your spouse do? What would your kids do? What are they going to do with the dog? Has he completely been forgotten in the corner? Well, you need to go give him some scritches and biscuits because you just left him.
That's really interesting. And I never thought about that until right now is if you have your pragmatic family group and, they all know that you're the prepper and hopefully you've convinced the rest of the people in your immediate circle to also, take up prepping a little bit. But until you actually storyboard some of this stuff out, you actually don't know what people are going to do, right? Like you could say, okay, hurricane's coming. What are you going to do? And you go, well, we're boarding up the windows and we're staying put. And you don't know that your wife is like, I'm taking the kids. I'm going to my sister's. Like, you don't know until you talk about it.
Exactly.
You're like, wait a minute. I was at work. I was going to come home. You were going to be here boarding up the doors. And no, like she's gone with the kids. Like, so until you start storyboarding this stuff out, you actually don't know you don't know that you're on the same page with everybody else.
You may not even be in the same song. So it really is a critical exercise that not enough people take part in. And I mean, as an example, coming up in the military, this is constantly something that we talk about. Just what would you do if you were on The Walking Dead? Blah 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 blah. And you get that one guy who's always like, "Well, I would be the security expert for the group. I would constantly be on watch, and I would do this." Run them through one of these scenarios and find out what they will really do, because
Oh,
I
sure.
guarantee they don't know exactly what they would do. They've got all the beans, the bullets, and the band-aids,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know how to drive to meet up with you. So, how do you incorporate all of these unknown factors without talking about it? It's nearly impossible.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I really never thought about that until right now, that I kind of have this assumption that, everybody I know that's sort of in my little prepper clan, I have this assumption that what I think they would do. But unless you sit down and you storyboard some of this stuff out, like I said, force fire is a good one. My plan is to stay put and mitigate that and fight a fire, but I just planned on having help. And if my help decides that no, they were going to go as soon as a force fire shows up, then that severely limits what I could actually do to mitigate that risk.
It does. It hampers your ability to survive because your dependence on others was misplaced or misguided.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that everybody out there is trying to screw you, but you have to know the finite resources.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So let's look at another example. Just kind of pulling one out of a hat here. Let's take a look at um, cyber attack on water infrastructure.
Okay.
So the primary risk is a cyber attack that disables a water treatment plant.
Mm-hmm.
Impact: you have no drinking water. You're not, I mean, whatever's in the towers, whatever's in your water towers right now, that is your finite resource. You have no more supply. Second order effect: well, there's no water in the towers. It's not being refilled. All of the citizens, all of the people around you are going to start to hoard bottled water. Let's keep it simple. We're not saying that everybody has, a Sawyer mini filter or anything like that.
Of
So they're
course.
going to start scooping up as much bottled water from Costco, Walmart, Amazon distribution centers, if they can get into them, wherever. And eventually that supply is going to run out. So now your third order effect: you have full on brawls at distribution points. You have potential riots. You have people becoming dehydrated. Dehydration leads to headaches, leads to grumpiness, leads to ineffective decision making, and things just kind of slide. Once they start to slide, it's really, really hard to stop it. It becomes the snowball effect. So, and I know we're kind of going over a lot of terms very quickly here, but you can quickly see how one event can cause all sorts of mayhem. It's the small wrench in the big machine. Eventually, it's going to create a problem, right?
Yeah. Oh no, I totally get it now. Absolutely. Because yeah, if you said, yeah, a North Korean kid with a laptop can make you have extremely yellow pee, I'd be like, that doesn't really make sense. But when you just storyboard it out like that you've got a cyber attack that can affect drinking water, and then it just spirals out of control from there, and you have to plan for that. And I think that a lot of people on city water, or even people on well, probably even more people on well water, they just assume, well, I have a well, so I'm okay. And a lot of people really have never had the water go out, even when the power goes out, and you've got some kind of natural disaster. Very rarely does the water turn off, um, but when it does, a lot of people aren't prepared for that. And if they are prepared for that because they've got some water bricks and they've got their bottled water or whatever it is, then you think about it. If it turns into some kind of long-term grid down situation, you really have to have a plan for that. We always say, a gallon a day per person, and that's for bathing, that's for eating, that's for drinking. You could squeeze it out with a quart a day if all you're trying to do is not die. But it doesn't take very long to just plow through your water, and then you're that person getting a fight at those distribution points. So just sitting back and saying, well, it's okay if there's a cyber attack on drinking water because I have a well, I'll be fine. Well, there's just, one little, link in the chain that if your well goes out, then you're just as bad off as everybody else.
Yeah, it really is. And sometimes it is that one link that it wasn't at a threat. It wasn't even on your matrix of my well water could go out. But now that something else has put it as a more critical feature, now you have to consider it. And you're one step away from either you have died of dysentery or you have died of acute lead poisoning to the skull. It, it kind of, you can go several thousand different directions off of
Hmm.
it, but as kind of to understand where you are on this, AC,
Hmm.
let's give me like 3 things that cyber attack on water infrastructure,
Hmm.
your risk plan, we're going to say that you have no control over the IT defenses.
Sure.
You are completely detached from that.
I
But
do
what
not
are
know my water department's IT guys. That is true.
yeah, what are 3 things that your government, your locality, or you could do to prevent getting into that potential riot situation?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I'm on a well, right? But I should also have a store of water. I have a handful of water bricks. So, with all the water I have stored in various places, that is already filtered or it has a couple drops of bleach in it, I probably have maybe 10 gallons laying around somewhere. Um, but then in addition to that, making sure that, yeah, I have a water filter or water purification tablets to harvest rainwater, things like that. And then obviously the government, you could, uh, if they got pallets of bottled water at the National Guard Armory locally, hopefully. I don't know, but that would
Okay.
be one way that, the local government could plan and mitigate for this. And then
So
obviously
yeah,
you
backup water and purification and something in
yep,
an emergency storage facility.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely one.
And then you've got, your local grocery stores that everybody is going to lean on immediately. And we're just assuming that cyber attack didn't take out the credit card machine at the local Kroger, because then who knows what would happen.
It would be mayhem in a hurry.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
If the
for damn
doors are
sure.
open and they can't take your money and they have all the supplies you need, people are the wild card.
So, what do you think that the government should have crowd control procedures in place that they can dust off in case something like this were to happen? Would that make a good mitigation step?
It probably would. I can tell you definitely they don't where I am. I mean, I'm in a small county where we've got 16 or 17 deputies for 30,000 people, maybe. Like, no, there's just, yeah, that's not going to happen. You call up your reservists. Maybe there's enough people that are at the local guard unit. But yeah, so you've got, let's say, best case scenario, you've got 60 people to do crowd control for the 30,000 people here that all want to go to the grocery store and steal water. No, you're SOL. It's not going to happen.
All I can think of right now is the riot room in Hot Fuzz.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Just
Exactly.
woefully underprepared, and that's the truth for a lot
Hmm.
of places. If they don't have dedicated riot teams, if you don't live in
Yep.
LA where they've got a suppression unit,
Sure.
I mean, it can happen anywhere. You might be fucked when it comes to government support. Something else your government might have and probably has in place is some sort of communication strategy to calm public fear. Hey, we are
Sure.
working on this. We are going to get it. Like, you just got to give us more time. Let's allay this. Let's not tear each other's heads off at the trucks.
And you're talking about like either the emergency broadcast network or taking over the local NOAA station or something like that.
Exactly. Those are even going around with the loudspeakers on the patrol cars.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh, we saw that there. That was actually very well portrayed in Outbreak, the one with Cuba
Oh yeah.
Gooding Jr.
Yep.
and the
Yep.
monkey.
Yep.
So there are things that can be done but you have to think of them ahead of time, because if you're trying to do this on the fly, you're just going to tie yourself in knots. You're going to worry yourself beyond your point of effectiveness, and you're going to get tired very quickly. This is a mental long game, and this is 3D chess in the dark.
100%.
So I, as far as your planning and kind of your storyboarding goes, I do have some kind of final tips on that, and it's use your scenario-based planning. So walk through a full timeline of events. If you're talking this over with your family, if you're making a D&D campaign with your kids, whatever, walk through the full timeline. Don't skip any steps, because if you skip steps, you might miss a critical cutoff point to your own disaster. And then revisit and update your risk matrix fairly frequently. I think I look at ours probably once a quarter, and just because we've been in this house since 2022, October of 2022. Since then, we've had 28 power outages. That's
Wow. Okay.
that's definitely higher up on the risk matrix, because it
Yep.
happens so fucking frequently, and I don't know why. And usually they're 15, 20 minutes at a time, but if it's a bad storm out and the power goes out, now it's compounded.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about compounded a little bit, but I don't want to get too far into it. You can have completely unrelated, synchronized primary threats. So the power could be going out because somebody ran over a transformer, but you are also under tornado warning. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? So how do you plan for that?
I was just, when you started talking about this, I was thinking about that. Like, let's say you've got something that would cause an evacuation, whether it's the hurricane or it's the forest fire or it's the earthquake. And you think, you know what? I'm all good to go. I've got my secondary and tertiary escape routes, and I can load up the car, and I've got my go bags. I got the pets, the kids. I know what I'm doing. But what if that is the one day that your battery on your truck finally decided to die? And then what? Like, you just don't think about those things. And then you didn't actually have a plan for that, because you had a plan to go and you had this reliable vehicle and you had all this stuff. And you said, when this thing happens, this is my way out. And then that's the day that, or you've got a flat tire on the vehicle when you come out, because those things can happen. You can have a flat tire. You can have a dead battery before you go to work. But the chances of it happening during some other catastrophe, while slim, are not impossible.
Yeah, your risk of being killed by a cow is never zero.
It's never zero. Yeah.
You're talking about getting hit by a meteor during a hurricane in the Alps.
It could happen. Yep.
Theoretically, anything is possible. And that's one of the last things that I have to say here is you have to look at this and engage from a multidisciplinary aspect. If you have teams are great for this, because you're going to have like logistics people that they're going to see all of your supply chain problems. You've got healthcare workers who are going to see all of your patient care problems. You've got emergency managers who are going to see the crowd control aspects, and on and on and on and on and on. But if you don't talk to them, you have no idea what is going through their head. So talk to your spouse. I would highly encourage, make this a weekly exercise. Just one scenario, write it all out, make it a bonding experience, get your kids involved, whatever. But if you build out kind of that all hazards emergency plan, and we do have a template available on our website, stakeholderprepping.com, where you can download that basic risk matrix, and you can fill in your second, third, if you want to do fourth order effects. But we've created this thing to build a decision tree for you. So if A happens, which is more likely to happen, B or C? If B happens, which is more likely to happen, E or F? So that decision tree, that's your cheat book. And it does have flexibility for any type of hazard, because now you can just skip to the page on tornadoes instead of fires. And one thing led to another. Well, now you're into a completely different book because all of the risks are associated with that one because you didn't think to link them. That's okay. You've thought of them at least once. But you can download that for your own personal preparedness, organizational planning, whatever you need to. We're going to make that free for you. It does have hazard identification on it, as well as a primary risk matrix. And then we do have a cascading effects table. So for each primary hazard, it's going to let you map out second and third order effects. For instance, primary hazard being an earthquake, first order effect is building damage. Second order effect would be people displaced from that building damage. Third order effect, an increase in disease and spreading risk because they're not using indoor plumbing. Cholera and typhoid and dysentery are a favorite. All of that can be accounted for. But then you can map out exactly how you want to mitigate or prepare for each stage of the event. Mitigation is doing what you can with your allocated resources ahead of time to minimize the impact. Preparing for it is pre-staging and applying those resources. They are not necessarily the same. I can mitigate my chances of dying in a car accident by putting on my seatbelt. I can prepare for that impact by understanding how to drive on black ice. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. But I want to go back to what you said a little bit about what a risk matrix and what would the government do, I think is what I'm trying to say, and how can you scale that? So like you had said something about, well, they've got IT people and they've got healthcare professionals and they've got the security professionals and all of that. You could scale that in your own little world, right? Like I'm thinking like this, that I've got friends who work in IT. I've never asked those friends to come over and say, hey, am I at risk for somebody hacking my Ring doorbell camera? Or am I at risk for someone hacking into any of the smart home stuff I have? And it might be very easy if you just engage those professionals, engage those teams, like you said, those people that have the professional wherewithal to say, yeah, actually, you should have your whole network in your house on a static IP address, and maybe then that's less likely to happen. Or your friend who's a doctor or an RN, you could engage them and say, hey, can you take a look at my first aid kit? Is there anything I'm missing? So you could emulate what disaster preparedness personnel within the government do on your small scale. And I've just never really thought about doing that. I mean, obviously, it's like you're a gun guy and it's say, hey, Chris, do I have enough ammunition? Or, what do you think about this gun or that gun? But the more boring stuff, I don't really engage those friends. But I do have friends with very boring careers that I could benefit from in this kind of scenario.
And you never know unless you talk to them.
You never know unless you talk to them. Now, you don't want everybody to know just how crazy you are, but
it's not crazy, it's prepared.
It's prepared. but that exact same thing. Like I've never thought about that. Like I do have friends that work in healthcare, and I can't think of any of them that I've said, "Hey, can you just take a look at what I have in the first aid kit?" I've made a lot of those decisions in a bit of a vacuum. Now, generally speaking, I do a lot of research and I look at, what some professionals say, but people that are familiar with me and my personal risk matrix and, my scenarios, where I live, what I'm more likely to encounter. I don't think any of those people have ever, looked at my medical supplies and said, oh, dude, you don't have a single Israeli bandage or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And same with your food stores. You could, if you have a friend who is a nutritionist, and have them like,
Yeah.
hey, I think I've got like 3 months worth of food here. Can you just like spot check me, and they'll be like, you have 9 months worth of food for a 250-pound adult male. Like, how much are you
Yeah.
eating? This is not healthy for you on a regular basis. Why do you have this much stored up for God
That's
knows how
actually
long?
that's a really good point. But yeah, this is what the emergency managers do, but they just do it on a large scale, and they bounce things off of these stakeholders. And doing that on your small scale, you could easily do that. You can engage the people you have within your social circle that are, yeah, like you said, the nutritionist or the healthcare worker or I don't know, the building inspector, right? I mean, you can engage people that say, "Oh yeah, actually you thought your house was safe in an earthquake, but it's not, and it's going to slide right off the foundation. But for a couple $100 worth of anchor bolts, you actually would be safe during an earthquake."
Yeah, and sometimes that's all it takes.
Hmm.
Or, I mean, there are anti-flood products, anti-earthquake, there's dampening, and there's floating foundations now. And I mean, there's all kinds of technology, but one, is it worth worrying about? Because is it that high on your risk matrix that you need to
Hmm.
consider it? And two, can you afford it? And
Yep.
if you do need it and you can't afford it, what do you need to do to get there?
Yep. And I'm going to go back to an earlier episode. You know, behind this one, the second most boring thing we've ever done, but the insurance episode, man. Like, have an insurance professional look at your policy because holy crap, that is the single biggest prep you have. It really is. That's a 6 or 7 figure check sitting in your kitchen drawer, but you have to know how to activate it, and you have to know if you're covered for the perils that you are more likely to encounter. So your insurance professional friend is a huge one. Get a second opinion from your insurance agent and say, "Hey, would you take a look at my policy because you know me, you know my situation more intimately than my insurance agent does." And I'll give you a perfect example. Just recently, I was reading my policy after our episode because I was like, "Man, I talked a lot of shit. I should probably go make sure. I should go make sure I'm legit." But my insurance company doesn't know that I have a deck because I built that deck after I got insured.
Ah,
And so it's not that my agent is out to screw me. I never told my agent I had a deck. I never thought about it. I never thought about getting the deck insured after I had a policy in place. So things like that if you engage your, insurance agent or insurance adjuster friends and say, "Hey, would you mind just reading my policy real quick?" They can immediately go, "Oh man, your coverage B limits are like way too low because you built a new garage after you bought your house, and your insurance company, they're not psychic. They didn't know that."
yeah, it's you spent $45,000 on a new pole barn with electricity and
Yep.
welding equipment and all sorts of stuff. And if that burns down, the most that you're going to get out of your insurance policy is 5,000 after a $5,000 deductible. So you should probably take a look and
Yeah.
update your coverages. And that really comes down to what's called an after action review, an AAR, a how did we do? And this also fits into the emergency planning P model. So once you have identified and mitigated and prepared and gone through the event, what could you have done better? What worked well? What failed? What lessons were learned? What are your next steps? How do you improve? That's part of the recovery arm of emergency planning that unfortunately at a national and oftentimes state and sometimes local scale just kind of gets forgotten about.
Sure.
There's no implementation on what can we do better. And I don't know why it's so forgotten about because it's so easy to do. What happened? What did we do? Did it work? Can we do it again with better effect? Or should we do it again? And for some reason, everyone in in these higher levels, they just completely forget that that exists. And so they never update or change the plan. And if you get stuck in that same cycle, you are dooming yourself to failure. Just flat out. We're not a doom and gloom podcast,
Nope.
but
It's all sunshine and butterflies, puppy dogs, ice cream,
you gonna learn today, boy.
whiskey and glitter and bullets.
You are fucking yourself if you don't use the information at your disposal
Mm-hmm.
to improve your own plans.
Yep.
So that's really what I've got on the expanded risk matrix. I know this one was kind of long-winded and boring, and it seems stupid, but if you have any realm of creativity inside of you, use it on this and you will thank yourself. I promise.
It's like I'm sitting here going, it sucks because it's important. It's so important, and it's boring, and it's not fun. But there are ways to make it a bit more fun. And Chris, I think before we close it out, I think maybe doing a quick couple minute dive on the pace model, because we've talked a little bit about that, and what happens if this one thing happens and you have no alternate and you have no contingency plan. So having, I think, that pace model set up as well is something that's really important when you're talking about your own personal risk matrix.
You're talking about primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency, and that applies to driving routes, communications. It really applies to anything: food sources, water sources, somebody chatting you up at the bar that you don't want to talk to.
Yep.
What is your primary method of getting away from them? Just switching seats. Alternate, hey, back off and then move. Contingency, pop them in the jaw. Emergency,
44
we're going to the ground. Like
1911. But yeah, you're right, and I take that. Remember, this is the prepper way, right? Is that 2 is 1 and 1 is none, and 4 is the pace model. That's you want to kind of have those 3 backups, your primary and your 3 backups for anything that's important. If it's important enough for you to prepare for, you should pace model it out. And I can give you a really quick example with a couple of minutes we have left. Is the power situation. You talked about your power going out. My power goes out 3 times more than yours because I'm on a little co-op and we have lots of trees and we have above ground power lines, and it goes out all the time. And it's not the end of the world, but I'm on a well, so I don't have power when the power's out, or I don't have water when the power's out. And I have a handful of like deep freezers. And so the first time I lost power and lost a few $100s worth of meat, I was like, that sucks.
That's rough.
I do not want that to happen again. So, I have, obviously I'm on the grid. I have the grid. That is my primary. I have a very expensive and silly solar battery inverter backup system. I realize that's crazy. I realize not a lot of people are going to do something like that. But for me, it was such a high priority within my own personal risk matrix that I always wanted to be able to have power, and I wanted the ability to be off grid long term if I needed to, that I have this really intricate backup power. And then I do have this contingency. I have a generator. I have a propane powered generator, and I realize that generator, although it's still 220 volts, meaning it can run the things like my well, it will eventually run out of gas. Now it's a dual fuel, so I could run propane, I could run gasoline. I do stock quite a bit of that, so that that's my contingency. That's number 3. And then I have a small camper, like a little tow behind type camper that I did kind of off grid, so I could kind of boondock it. Like I can go off grid and it's got AC power. My emergency would be I could backfeed the 110 circuit on the home from my camper that has solar panels and a 1,000 watts of power, or 1,000 amp hours of of battery on it.
Just
And
right
that's
through your inverter on the camper.
yeah, right through the inverter on the camper. I could backfeed, half of my panel, as long as I didn't overload that and catch fire. And keep in mind, I realize any of our electrician friends listening, I know exactly what you're thinking and exactly what you're going to hate mail us about. I know it. But yes, you're exactly right. So, but that would be my emergency. Is so I have this pace model for electricity, because that's the one thing for me that's so important. Like if I have a forest fire, how am I going to fight the fire without the ability to generate water? Right? There's these secondary and tertiary effects that come with losing power. I'm going to lose all of my food stores that are in the freezer. I could go on, but that's the reason that electricity was so important to me, and that's why I pace modeled that out. And I literally have 4 different ways to get electricity into my home. And call me crazy, but that's just the pace model. That's the thing in my risk matrix that was really high up there, because it's got a very high likelihood of happening, lose power all the time, and the impact could be severe. It's not always, but it could be.
And you're actually well developed enough at that you could evolve that into what's called a PACE X model. So you have your primary, alternate, contingency, emergency, extreme.
I didn't know there was an X.
The X is not commonly used. It's actually not super widely used or known.
Son of a...
The X would be, have you built a bicycle rack that you could tie up to your pump, and if you need water, you just go out there and start spinning?
By next week, I'm going to tell you my extreme.
That's fair, because if you've developed, you can continue to develop. We'll definitely go into this on next episode with practicing, but amateurs do it until they get it right. Professionals do it until they can't get it wrong. So developing your pace and your pace X model, that might be where you need to go if you really, really want electricity. Do you have a spinning bicycle attached to an inverter that you're just going to sit there and power the entire house while you watch Real Housewives?
Yep.
So I'm going to do this, and I have not warned you about this, AC. So
oh no.
Final thing.
Okay.
If we have any listeners, or if any of our listeners know any qualified or experienced code developers, mobile game platform developers, anything like that, send us an email to stakeholderprepping@gmail.com with the subject coding expert, and we might have a project for you. Something kind of back burner right now, but if we can get this legs, I think all of our listenership will really enjoy it. So we're going to leave that one closed, but if you know a coding expert, or you are a coding expert, or have mobile game development experience, send us an email. We'll get back to you, and let's see if we can make something happen. Until next week, just remember, you are your own stakeholder.